Do you want to wake up feeling like you're stepping into who you're meant to be, into the best possible version of you? What if I told you that the key to your best life, health, and happiness are all around you? You just have to find what works for you. I'm Hope Pedraza, and I believe that there isn't just one way to live a healthy and meaningful life, and that all you need is a little inspiration to make changes that last from the inside out. Each week, I'll be sharing tangible tips and inspirational interviews to help you on your journey. These are the steps to take to improve your life and live with purpose. This is Hopeful and Wholesome. Hey y'all, welcome back to Hopeful and Wholesome. Today I'm kicking off part 1 of a 5-part series that is all about unraveling your worth. And it is all about breaking free from the hustle and stepping into true health, true well-being, and true freedom. And this is coming off the heels. I would say up the heels, but this is a work in progress. But this is coming off of the learnings and my own personal journey of this and how deeply tied and I say our as women, we as women, our worth is to our productivity, our accomplishments, our success, our to-do list. And I wanted to break this down for you and how this topic of worth and your worth, your worthiness is tied to every aspect of your well-being, your physical, your mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. And this episode 1, we're going to dive into this topic. And I think so many of us struggle with, and I also think we don't realize that it's running the show. And it's the belief that our worth is tied to our productivity, our ambition, our achievements. So if you have ever felt guilty when you rest, you struggle to slow down, you only feel, quote, good enough when you're accomplishing something or have had, quote, success at something, this episode is for you. And if you don't know that this is tied to the worthiness conversation, it is, and we're going to break it down. So I want to start with this first episode of really talking about how your worth is not measured by your to-do list and kind of how this happens culturally and is kind of innate in us. And I will break it down how to shift this, but this first episode, I want to talk about just bring the awareness to the conversation. From a young age, we are taught that our value is what we do and not who we are, right? And this isn't necessarily explicit. Like we may not be explicitly told that, but it's the conversations, the rhetoric, the conditioning, society messaging, right? It can be sneaky. So think about at school, you're praised for good grades, not necessarily for being intuitive or kind or self-aware. And I'm not saying this as a general rule because there are some kids who do get praised for those things, but generally speaking, right, we're praised for our grades and how well we're doing. And you might even be rewarded for good grades. I was rewarded for good grades in school, right? As we move into adulthood, especially as business owners, as entrepreneurs, as high performers, that belief gets even stronger. And it's all about the more we achieve, right? The more validation we get, the more we feel seen and we feel important. But what happens when we stop, right? So I want to break this down with some statistics and some actual facts about this. So 80% of women struggle with low self-esteem in the workplace. And this is based on actual studies that have been done on women in the workplace. Studies show that women rate themselves lower than men in self-promotion, and success and busyness are more strongly linked for women than men. And these aren't just random numbers, right? These are all of this is a result of generations of conditioning that taught us, we as women, that our value is in our work. So I want to break this down. Why is this happening? And more importantly, what I'm going to get to eventually is how do we start unlearning these things, right? So the cultural conditioning that links this whole self-worth to productivity conversation, especially in women, mostly in women, is deeply rooted in historical, physiological, and even societal factors, right? It's generational. Right? Like I said, this is kind of innate in us, but there are ways to untangle this. So first, let's talk about the good girl conditioning. And this starts from childhood and goes into adulthood. So I mentioned before the number 80%, right? Why do 80% of women struggle with low self-esteem in the workplace? And this is the statistics that has been proven multiple times. From a young age, let's talk about the cultural part of this.
From a young age, girls are praised for being helpful, for being quiet, for being diligent, for being accommodating. While boys, what are boys praised for and encouraged to do? To be assertive, right? To stand up for yourself, be assertive, to take risks, to promote themselves, right? Self-promotion. And again, these aren't necessarily explicit, like we're telling our boys, go promote yourself, but this is the narrative, right? This conditioning teaches women that approval comes from being good and doing enough, right? Rather than simply being enough, right? So let's talk about the kind of the psychological impact of this. This creates this unconscious, this subconscious good girl syndrome. And you've probably heard that before. I had an episode, one of my first, I don't know, probably 15 episodes. I had an episode where we talked about this a little bit. We didn't unpack it fully, but we had a little conversation about it. But the good girl syndrome. This is where a woman internalizes this belief that her value is dependent on how much she achieves and contributes to others. That is her value, and that is the only thing that brings her value, right? The belief, I'm going to say it again. I want you to hear me. I want you to hear me on this. This is important. This good girl syndrome that we carry into adulthood with us is this internalized belief that a woman, her value is dependent on how much she achieves and how much she contributes to others, right? It's about external things and not this internal about being enough. Okay. So, how does this show up in adulthood? Because we carry this with us. It's not like we hear this at a young age and then all of a sudden we let it go. It doesn't happen like that, unfortunately. So here's how it shows up. Fear of self-advocacy, right? Standing up for yourself, advocating for yourself, being assertive, right? Fear of self-promotion. And this is why women rate themselves lower than men on self-promotion. There's whole studies on this, how much lower women rank themselves than men on self-promotion. The tendency to overwork and overgive. This is to prove their worth. This is why women are less likely to negotiate raises or ask for promotions, right? Because they feel like they have to overwork and prove themselves before they can do those things. Anxiety around resting or setting boundaries or saying no. I had a whole episode about this, the boundary thing, because it feels like letting people down. And I had an episode not too long ago about the sacral center, and I talked about the fear of disappointment and how the fear of disappointment was the deepest feminine wound. And this is generational, right? This is something that we're born with. We are born with this fear of disappointment and letting other people down. It's just why we struggle so much with resting, setting boundaries, or just saying no. So think about this superwoman archetype that women are expected to be. We're expected to juggle a career, a business, motherhood, your personal life, all of this seamlessly and looking really hot and sexy while you're doing it, right? Women are conditioned to believe that this is the standard, the gold standard, the only standard. And it leads to guilt and shame when they can't, quote, do it all. And if you know anything about Brene Brown, she talks a lot about shame, has done a lot of studies on shame. And there's this whole cascade effect that happens when we're living with that guilt and shame. Shame is about us as a person. Guilt is about the act, right? But either way, these things are happening when we are living by this good girl syndrome. So I want to talk about productivity as well. This productivity myth that says busyness equals success. I want to say this to you as a disclaimer. All of these things I'm talking about, like there's no judgment around any of this because I have lived by all of these things at one point or another. And it's still something that I have to be really intentional about working on. So I just feel like I need to say that. So this whole busyness equals success thing. Why is busyness equated with success, especially from women? And this is another thing that is proven by studies. There are studies that show that women, this is a belief of women, specifically women. So culturally, and it really is all about the views of Western society, particularly the United States, right? We place this really high value socially on work ethic and hustle and busyness, right? There's a kind of a hierarchy there that it is just understood. Okay. For women, there's also this additional layer of expectation because not only do we have to be productive at work, but we also have to carry the emotional and domestic labor at home, right? We have to do the thing at work and build the business, but then we're also expected to keep the home together, keep the family together, and keep raise the kids and be in charge of all of the things at home. This leads to this phenomenon that's called time poverty, that studies have shown, that studies call time poverty, where women have less time for themselves because they're expected to manage everything, their work, the caregiving, home life, without acknowledgement. So women learn that if they're not doing something productive, then they're wasting time, right? This is what Western society has taught us. If they're not doing something, they're wasting time. And so success is no longer measured by how much joy or fulfillment or alignment is there. It's measured by how much. It's the quantity, right? Not the quality, not like, am I enjoying myself in the process? It's how much they accomplish, how busy they are, how exhausted they feel at the end of the day, how tired are you at the end of the day? And think about it. The whole I'm so busy has become this badge of honor for so many of us, for Western society especially. And we feel like if we can't agree with the people who talk about how busy they are, then we feel not enough. Like, well, maybe I should be doing more. All these women are so busy and their schedules are packed, and I feel right. And so it's this badge of honor, and it's kind of this race or this like competition, right? And women oftentimes, a lot of times, feel pressured to overbook their schedules just because they equate busyness with being valuable and successful. Like, how much can I fit into my calendar every day? How much can I fit into my calendar every week? How booked am I? I mean, think about conversations you hear on a regular basis talking about how, I mean, it's one of the most common things when you ask somebody how they are. Oh, just busy, right? Okay. Like, so I feel like it's time to shift the narrative. We're going to talk about that, but that is what is at play right now in Western society. The other thing that happens with women is this fear of slowing down, that rest is unproductive. I'm not being productive if I'm resting. So why do women struggle to feel safe when resting? Because that's what it is. It's just they don't feel safe. And there have been studies on this that show that people with higher self-worth report greater satisfaction in all aspects of life. And we don't feel satisfied, right? Women don't feel satisfied. They don't feel worthy when they're resting. It doesn't feel safe to rest. Why is that? Women have historically been valued for their service to others, right? Think about it culturally. Their primary roles are caretaking and homemaking and community support and social planner, right? They're planning the things. And I love historical fiction and anything historical, really, even if it's nonfiction. But I love learning about it. And that's really what you learn when you look back at history and you look at the roles that women played. They took care of the kids, they took care of the homes, they got the community together, and they hosted social events, and they, right, that's what they were responsible for. So this has created this subconscious belief that a woman's value is directly linked to how much she does for other people rather than who she is, right? There's no emphasis on who she's being in the process of that, much less is she happy doing it. Like, who cares, right? That's the narrative around that. And so when women rest, they experience this guilt and this anxiety and this unease and oftentimes physical discomfort because their nervous system has been trained to associate doing nothing with not being valuable. Our nervous systems have been trained to associate doing nothing with not being valuable. Period. That's it. So I'm going to get to this in a little bit, but it becomes this trauma response for us. The doing becomes a trauma response because it doesn't feel safe to not do because we have been culturally, societally conditioned to believe that if we're not doing anything, we're not valuable. Let that sink in for a second. Your brain has wired productivity as safe, and it's wired stillness and rest as unsafe. That's what's happened. This is the impact on our nervous system and our brains. We have wired productivity as safe and stillness and rest as unsafe. So when women slow down, they rest, or they're told, just rest, just slow down. Their nervous system is like, blah, their nervous system goes crazy. It goes into this fight or flight thing immediately because it perceives rest as a threat to their survival because it's literally been wired to do all the time and don't stop. That's how it's been wired. And this is so it's in our cellular memory. It's in our DNA. Like I said, this is innate. We're born with this. So yes, we get conditioned as well because it's kind of like the nature versus nurture. It's both. For women, it's both. We can't escape it. Generationally, that's what we've been taught, and that's what's wired in us when we're born. And then we're born into society that's still teaching us the same thing. So it's like this double whammy. And this is why burnout recovery and recovering from burnout often and most often requires this deep nervous system recalibration because you literally have to rewire your brain. And I'm going to give you an example, a personal example in a second, but it requires some really intense rewiring for the most part. So think about, and you've probably experienced this before. If you've taken a break and you've ever felt like you need to justify why you're taking a break. I have done this. And I've done this so many times where I had to make sure people knew that I was going to get back to work. Like, first of all, nobody cares. Second of all, why? Why do I have to justify? Well, I'm going to get back to work at this time. Like, also, I'm also like, I'm the boss because I'm an entrepreneur. So who cares? Why am I telling anybody that? Why does anybody have to know that? Nobody needs to know that. But that's the wiring that happens in our brain. So feeling the need to justify why you're resting or when you're resting or when you're going to take a break, whether it's by working harder later or proving that you're still being productive in other ways. And that is so common. Well, I'm going to stop working, but oh, what I've got to do, I've got this other to-do list at my house that I have to do, right? Just I'm going to be productive in other ways. Well, I'm not working, but you're still checking off 85,000 things to do on your to-do list. So you're still doing something, right? So I want to go finish this last one here. The one about how men rate themselves higher in self-promotion. There's a Harvard study, and this is again based on facts. There's a Harvard study where men rated themselves as 61 out of 100 for self-promotion, and women rated themselves at 46 in terms of how comfortable they felt promoting themselves, right? Men are socially conditioned to own their achievements. Women are taught to be modest, be selfless. Don't be too much. Don't be too flashy. Don't brag. Don't, right? Women, therefore, women are more likely to downplay their accomplishments and their achievements and their success to avoid being perceived as arrogant or aggressive or too assertive or alpha. I'm using air quotes here, the alpha, right? So in workplace settings, this has also been proven by studies. Women are often judged more harshly for asserting themselves or taking up space, being assertive. This is called I'm using quotes here, it's called the likability penalty. Women who self-promote are viewed as less likable. Women who are more assertive are viewed as less likable than men. If men were asserting themselves the same way, it would not have the same effect on their surrounding environment. First of all, I hate that. Can I just say that? I hate that. I hate it. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. A woman stands up and she's assertive and she's taking up space and she's loud and she's authoritative and she's viewed as less likable. If a man were to do the exact same thing, it would not have the same effect. I hate that. I hate it. I just want to say that. So therefore, societal conditioning here, women hesitate to share their success stories. They hesitate to stand up for themselves and be assertive in the workplace or in their business or talk about their accomplishments and achievements. And again, sharing their success stories. They wait until they feel 100% qualified before applying for promotions or speaking on stages or getting in front of people, being seen, or just claiming their leadership roles. They feel like they have to check all these boxes first rather than just going for it. And this is imposter syndrome, right? Imposter syndrome runs deep because if their worth is tied to what they do, then no matter how much they achieve, it's never going to feel like enough. That's what happens there. So if your worth is tied to what you do, it doesn't matter how much you do, how much you achieve, it's never going to be enough, ever, right? Studies show that women will only apply for a job if they feel like they meet 100% of the qualifications, while men will apply even if they only meet 60%. That's insane. That's insane, y'all. That's how we're wired. That's how we're wired. All of these patterns that I'm talking about go back to one thing. Women have been conditioned to believe that their worth is something that they have to prove rather than something that they inherently own. That's our conditioning. We feel like our worth is something we have to prove rather than something that we inherently own. So we're taught to prioritize other needs first, other people's needs first, right? This is leading to overgiving and leading to burnout. We're taught to be, quote, nice and accommodating. And, right, this is leads to difficulty setting boundaries. We're not taught the difference between being nice and being kind, right? There's a difference. And being nice is how you end up being a doormat. This is because we have trouble setting boundaries. We're taught to work twice as hard to be taken seriously. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because women do have to work harder to be taken seriously because we live in this patriarchal society. So the fact is, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is going to lead to constant overworking and overachieving and self-doubt because we know that history proves that women do have to work harder to be taken seriously. So you see that the healing from this wiring isn't just about self-care or nervous system regulation, and that's part of it, but it's about this deep untangling of these subconscious beliefs that worth equals productivity. There is a deep rewiring that has to happen to fix that. And so the story I wanted to share, my personal story of this, it's just a quick story, but and I shared this in a podcast interview I did not too long ago on another gal's podcast. But I had my own journey with burnout, and I've talked about it before on social media and on the podcast. And the thing though that I don't think I've talked about linking this. So I grew up with really crazy gut stuff, right? I had IBS. This is what the diagnosis was. It's such a BS diagnosis. I had IBS. I was, I'd done a ton of different doctors and hospitals and colonoscopies and endoscopes. I mean, I had so much poking and prodding up and down and up and through things in my body before I was 13 years old. And all for it to be like, oh, it's IBS. And so that was a journey that I had on my own. And so doctors aren't really any help when it comes to IBS because it's just kind of a catch-all. They don't know what to do about it. So fast forward 10, 15 years later, how many years later it was, I did my own work to help heal my gut, right? I went plant-based and I was really hardcore plant-based for like 12 years. And I did a lot of work in my gut and that did so much for me, helping my gut and, dove into nutrition and all this stuff. So that helped. Yes. I rewired my relationship with food. I had, of course, they don't ask you this when you go to the doctor. I was type A perfectionist, had disordered relationship with food, disordered eating behaviors. Of course, that was linked to, of course, that's why I had IBS. So heal my rewired relationship with food, help, balance my body with minerals. I was doing the nervous system work. And so in my head, it's like, okay, it's done. Like, I healed my gut, I fixed the things and everything should be fine now. But I couldn't understand why years later, my body was still holding on to stress. And I was recognizing these things happening in my body. I was getting sick all the time. My immune system was not great. I was getting injured all the time, even though I felt like I'm eating good and I'm working out and blah, blah, blah. So there was clearly inflammation going on. My body was breaking itself down, right? Cortisol, the stress hormone, is catabolic, meaning it breaks things down. So, of course, it's getting injured all the time. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, I've done all this work on my gut. I've done the nervous system work. I've done so much work on like the inner child stuff. I've worked with coaches and mentors and life coaches and all that to help with all these things. But my body was still holding on to the stress. Why did I still feel like this? It was all about the programming, my belief that my worth was tied to my productivity. These sneaky little patterns that come up where I always felt like I needed to be doing more. The way ambition for me was just this trauma response because I didn't feel safe not doing. I didn't feel safe not being productive. I didn't feel safe doing all the time in working towards that achievement and that success because I didn't know who I was outside of what I achieved. My worth was tied to that 100%. And it always had been. I was a straight A student, overachiever. My entire life was tied to that. And all of this was brought into adulthood. And so, yes, I had done the work on my gut and the minerals and all the other stuff. Those pieces were never rewired, those pieces were never addressed. Because here's the thing, if you've ever read The Body Keeps the Score, if you haven't, I highly recommend it. Your body keeps score of this pattern. If you're constantly in this state of, I have to do more, your nervous system is constantly in the stress response. So even though you're doing the nervous system work, you haven't rewired those beliefs. You haven't rewired those patterns. So, yes, the nervous system work is still helping. I'm not saying it's not doing anything because it is, but your adrenals are still overworked. Your minerals are still depleted. Your digestion is still going to be impacted by all of this. This isn't just an emotional issue. This turns into this full body energy crisis, right? Physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, all of this. And I see it. I saw it in myself, see it. And this is still like a healing process, right? And I see it all the time. My clients, they come to me and they're exhausted and inflamed, like just like I was. They're bloated. They have skin issues. They have hormonal imbalances. But at the root of it, like, yes, we can do the labs and see exactly what's going on. But at the root of it, it's this pattern of overdoing, overachieving, overgiving, and tying their self worth to their success, tying their self worth to how much they're doing. And I know I've done this so many times, like how proud I am with how long my to do list is, and that sense of accomplishment, crossing it off. You know that feeling you get to cross off your to do list, and it's so satisfying. But then it's never ending. It's never ending. Right? So it's getting stuck in this pattern. And the thing is, when you're a business owner, yes, like the fact is your to-do list is never ending. There's never not something to do. But it's when we get sucked into this pattern, we have to do all of it every day without stopping. And we're tying our worth to that, our own self-worth to that. And we can't stop, we can't rest, we can't slow down. Like this is when it becomes a pattern or it becomes a problem. And this is when you can really understand that it is a problem. If you don't feel safe slowing down, if you don't feel safe resting, if you don't feel safe stopping, and by safe, I mean, if you're stopping and you're like, oh, I'm going to go, I said this in that podcast interview I told you about. Because when I first started to untangle all this stuff, it's like, okay, yeah, I'll start taking a break and I'll go for, I'll go for walks during the day. And that was my thing. But on the walk, I was either listening to like a business podcast or I was listening to a masterclass. I was still doing and thinking about it. I was still not doing. I was still doing while I was pretending to not do. You see what I'm saying? This is what happens. So if you have ever felt not safe, like you can't turn it off, this is that pattern, right? So if this is resonating, the first step is awareness. So I want you to ask yourself, when do I feel most valuable? Do I believe I am worthy if I'm resting? If I'm doing nothing? If I'm simply being? And really, really honestly ask yourself that. Get into a space where you can really reflect on this and contemplate. Do I believe at the core of my being that I am worthy if I'm resting, doing nothing, or simply being? Do I still feel like I'm worthy? And one of the most powerful things that I do with my clients is not just healing their bodies. That's important and it's really powerful, but it's reprogramming these deep subconscious beliefs so that their body actually feels safe letting go of this old conditioning. And it requires some work. It requires some effort because no supplement or lab is going to fix a body that's stuck in this pattern of stress and overdrive and overachieving. Nothing is going to fix that except doing that deep rewiring. So if this is resonating for you, if this is hitting home, you're not alone because I am with you. I've been there and this is still, like I guess this is still a work in progress because the good news is the pattern isn't permanent. No matter how many generations pass that we're born with this wiring, it's not permanent. It can be rewired. It's never too late to rewire. And that's what we're going to talk about in the rest of this series. This is just part one. This is just part one. And I just want to bring the awareness to us and the why. Why is it like this? And am I like this, right? The awareness, just understanding that this exists. So in the next episode, I'm going to dive into exactly how we start breaking that pattern and start breaking from this conditioning. But I would love to hear from you. And I have some really exciting things on the other side of this podcast series. So I want you to either, you can email me, I'll put it in the show notes, or if you're on Instagram, DM me the word worth. And first of all, DM me that word and then tell me too what your biggest realization you have from this episode about your worthiness. And I want to hear your takeaways, but DM me that word worth because I'm going to have an offer for you on the other side of this and you'll be the first to learn about it. I have something fun that I'm going to do and that I'm going to start. I don't want to give too much away. So that's all I'm going to say, but you'll be the first to know. So just DM me that so you can get on the list so that you know when this is happening. And if you already know after listening to this, that this is a pattern that you're really, really ready to unravel, that was a lot of alliteration, then and you feel like you're done trying, you feel like or pushing, forcing, you feel like you're done tying your worth to your productivity and the hustle and the overachieving, all that stuff. And you really want to start feeling safe and rested and truly nourished, like real, like you've done the work on the body, but you're like, these programs are still happening on this subconscious level. I would love to support you. So just DM me or reply to the email. Put me, if you're not on social media, I'll put my email in the show notes and we can talk about how I help women break free from this in some one-on-one work, instead of this really special one-on-one offer that I have outside of the other offer that I was talking about that I'm creating after this. So DM me worth or email me and we can talk about it. But you really want to get on the list. I'm telling you, you want to get on the list because you're going to want what's on the other side of this series. But I will see you in the next episode where we're going to talk about this hidden link between self-worth and chronic symptoms and what's actually happening to your physical body. So stay tuned and see you in the next one.
Thanks for listening to Hopeful and Wholesome, y'all. If you found value in this week's episode, please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast and leave a review to let me know what you thought. I'd love to know what you find useful in these episodes so I can know how to provide the most value I can to my listeners. And if you have topics you'd like to know more about, I'd love to hear those as well. So shoot me a message on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. It's at the Hope Pedraza, or you can visit my website, hopefulandwholesome.com. Thanks, y'all.